So, as I said, we'll be going through streamlining your workload, and just to help me know what everyone does actually find the most challenging, into the chat box, what do you find is your biggest workload challenge? So, it might change throughout the different times of the year, it might have changed throughout different times of your teaching career, but what would you say is currently your biggest workload challenge? So, we'll do that into the chat box. The sorts of things that I would typically expect are marking workload. That's normally a massive one. The workload linked to marking, any admin tasks. I suppose that's something as well. If there is report writing, data analysis, things like that are massive drains on workload as well. I mean, the biggest thing with workload is actually the teaching, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone say the teaching is the biggest workload challenge, because I guess that's the bit that most people actively enjoy, is being in the classroom teaching in front of people. So it's thinking outside of the classroom, biggest challenges. So what we're going to go through is what I would have predicted from my personal experiences, some of the biggest challenges are, and a few strategies that I implemented throughout my teaching career and also since then to try and help me with my biggest challenges. And then you can use these to try and help you. So we'll be looking at strategy to try and make your marking more manageable. Looking at streamlining parents' evenings, or at least a strategy to streamline the appointments at parents' evenings. Looking at your mindset, which is actually something I talk to students quite a lot, but it's a big one for teachers as well. So your mindset, and then time-saving templates. So just the use of templates to streamline as much as possible. And then Q&A. That may be cut because I can see it at the moment. I think I've got two people. I'm not certain if you can hear me, because for one of you, it is still saying that you're connecting to audio, which might mean you can't hear me. Hopefully you can though. So I'm going to go through this bit very quickly because we are starting late and you might have been here last time. So I have been teaching since 2019, I was about to say 2009, going back much further than 2019. I've been teacher of biology and all sciences in secondary schools, head of department, head of biology, but then I left teaching this year to just focus on my online business. And one element of that is to provide resources for teachers to try and help them. And that's where these free CPD sessions came in, because when I was looking for CPD sessions as a teacher, I found that there weren't many available, very costly for the school and the cost of your cover, and inflexible with the timing, schools weren't as able to offer it. So that's why I decided to start to offer some for free, flexible and online, with the recording to hopefully fit around your workday and your home life as well. And you can then access them at any time afterwards also. So let's go through the first one, managing marking, which is actually what I filmed today for my podcast, was the whole class feedback. But what I was interested in is, what is everyone's marking policy? As I'm starting this later, I don't know if I'm going to get people actively answering live. So while I wait to see if we get any responses on what your marking policy is, I'm going to talk a bit about what my experience has been with marking policies. And we can base it on that if there isn't a live response. At least if you're watching the recording, you've got something we can base it on. So marking can be extremely time consuming. However, it is necessary at certain extents to be able to monitor students' understanding, misconceptions, and progress. Now, I've had varying marking policies. I've had one that was far stricter, which was every 2 weeks, books had to be marked, and you had to mark in red pen. You had to have a red box at the end of your marking for that 2 weeks with an IP, which was an improvement prompt or improvement point, I can't remember now. And you had to show extensive written feedback every 2 weeks in every book for every class, on top of marking tests and marking homeworks. So I spent hours marking when I was doing that one. At my recent school that I just left, our marking policy was a lot more flexible because we greatly valued the importance of verbal feedback and knowing that teachers' time needs to be utilised in a way that's going to best help students. We didn't feel that marking book notes from the class was a valuable use of time. So ours was more flexible, that you needed to show that you had acknowledged bookwork somehow. And that could be students peer marking, self-marking, then writing down targets when you are giving verbal feedback. It didn't have to be you writing in it. And there had to be one piece of work that wasn't a test that was marked in detail with a target. But we were allowed to do whole class feedback for that. So at this school, it was a lot more flexible and students still made just as much progress, if not more. And that's where I really got to focus on this whole class feedback because it was a lot more flexible. So if the marking is one of the big strains on your workload, it is dependent on what your school's marking policy is. And if it is really strict, then perhaps that's something as a department could you talk about and see how everyone feels? Could the head of department bring it up at the next HODS meeting? Just some way to maybe suggest ways to improve it if it is really strict. If it's not, and you're not already trying these strategies, or not all of them, then I would highly recommend these suggestions if you are struggling for time because of marking. Number one is whole class feedback. And I think that's what I'm going to go through in a bit more detail. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But then other strategies. If you are doing questions in class, instead of collecting the books and marking it, I always did peer marking or self-marking. And while they were marking it, I'd go around and just do a quick check to see they had understood what they were actually marking, or you can verbally check students. Sometimes if it was a really straightforward homework to mark, I would also do that. It'd be only if it was something that teacher judgment was really necessary for that marking, like year 13's writing the biology essay, for example. I wouldn't get them to peer mark it. I would collect it in a mark. We talked a bit, if you were at the session last time on ChatGPT, we did actually also talk about how you could set up some questions that can be automatically marked. So for ChatGPT, you could always ask students to submit their answers electronically. If you've got Satchel One, you can get them to upload it digitally, or you might have your own platform at school that you use. And you could say to ChatGPT, here's the questions I asked, or you could have even got ChatGPT to generate them and say, here are the answers. Here's what this student wrote. Can you mark this, telling me which questions they got correct, total mark, what went well, even better if. You can then check that for accuracy, copy and paste it, and that is your detailed feedback. Much quicker than you doing it, but you still spend the time checking it. And obviously Google Forms is that as well, but you then have to create the questions, which can be quite timely. And then the last thing I would suggest is prioritizing, which I'm sure everyone does anyway. If I know that I have got, or used to, have a week where I had a year 13 test or maybe year 13 mocks, and I also had another year group test and another one, and this one had done a required practical that needed to be marked, I would then be prioritizing the other classes I had to teach, what I was setting them for homework. Was it something that could easily be self-assessed as the start of the next lesson or peer marked at the start of the next lesson? Or could it be more a homework where it's, you need to go and read this, and then I'm going to question you on it at the start of the lesson? So working out, if I've got a really heavy test marking week, for my classes for homework for that week, I'm going to change what I'm setting so it's not something I have to collect in and mark. So you just prioritize and even out your workload a bit. But the whole class feedback then, let's take a look. If you haven't used this before, this is the sort of thing that I have used. So what you have is a template like this, which I have one for free that you can download. I have linked that in this PowerPoint that should have been in the email that you got. And what I do is I will mark whether it's the books, an assignment. I don't use this for tests, but it could be a homework that I've set. And I mark the first few and work out what some common comments that I would want to write on them. And I actually write those here under the targets. So it might be that I've noticed quite a few people have, I don't know, let's make something up here, said the lungs is where respiration happens instead of breathing. So they've said that misconception, that might be my target number one, to clarify that point. Maybe lots of people misspell a particular word. Maybe lots of people, I thought, to improve a presentation of a table, if that's what it was, they should have the units only in the heading, not next to every number. So marking a few, noting down common things, and then as I go through the rest, if anything else crops up, that is quite common, I add it. If it's just for one student, I'll handwrite it on. But what you can then do is, when you're marking it, the only markings I tended to make were a tick to show I'd looked, and then the T letters with a space at the bottom so they can write in what that T means. And then when I've gone through all of the work, I then type in onto this as a PowerPoint, overall, what stood out that the class did well on the whole. Any common mistakes that I saw, any misconceptions that need to be addressed, any common spelling mistakes. Presentation, I didn't always have a need to fill something in there. That could be the way they presented the work, if you'd asked it to be in a particular way. Had they done that well, or did it need to be tweaked? And then either one or two even better ifs to prompt students how they could have got an even higher mark or improved their skill set. And the and finally bit, that was quite variable. That could just be like a summary of what you should have learned from this piece of work. It could be highlighting students who have gone above and beyond with the effort or made amazing progress. So that was quite flexible, what you might want to put there. But the benefits I find with this is it saves time because I'm not writing down all the targets. And I found the students engaged with this more because they just have those T's in their book and they'd be like, oh, what does that mean? And I'd be like, right, well, that's what we're doing at the start of the lesson. I would then project that up. That would be my first page of the PowerPoint, the starter. I talk through all the feedback and they then have to write down for their target, the letter and the number that they got. They write down what the target is. And I found they actually remembered it better because they were writing it down. They engaged with it more because they had to really actively listen and work out what their personal target was. So I found it was quicker for me. The students engaged with the feedback more. And not only that, I save these in that lesson folder. So when I then teach this the next year, I open it up and have a look. What were the common mistakes and misconceptions that the class made last year to see if I can tweak my PowerPoint at all or the way I'm teaching it in hope that those common mistakes and misconceptions aren't being embedded again, or at least I'm aware to point them out. So many benefits of using this whole class feedback. So if it's something you haven't tried, definitely try it. Bring it to the rest of your department, see how they feel, see if you can start to embed that more to help with your time management, streamlining your workload linked to the marking. This bit I've actually said already, so we'll move on to the next one, which is parents' evenings. Probably my least favorite evenings of the year, not because I don't value the importance of sharing the information with the parents and being able to talk to the parents, but it's just so exhausting. At the end of already teaching a full day, you're doing about another 3 solid hours of talking. And it's not immediately. You have a tiny little break where you're just hanging around and then you go straight into it. And it's just exhausting. So I often found that after parents' evenings, I would start to lose my voice or I'd get ill. So it wasn't actually me who came up with this. It was someone at my previous school. She used to give these sheets to parents to try and overcome some of these common challenges. The fact that appointments might overrun. You're repeating the same answers to the same questions. You do have some bits that are personal for every student. Parents might forget or misunderstand information. So that's why she came up with this. And it was such a great idea. I've since then always used my own version as well. And then when I was head of biology, head of science, I would create one and distribute it to the department as well. So we could all use it to give a consistent message and to help everyone out. Now, parents' evenings have changed quite a lot since COVID. So it'd be interesting to know how people's parents' evenings work, because mine used to always be face-to-face, which I think everyone's used to be. COVID hit, then they all went online. Now I think some schools have gone back to face-to-face. My school remained online because we found there were lots of benefits for parents in terms of flexibility, for staff well-being as well. And because being online, it has that set time limit, it kept every appointment on time, much more efficient. And then you didn't get parents getting annoyed that someone might be pushing in or they were waiting ages and their time slot wasn't there. So it cut out a lot of those issues. I'm guessing you don't have any control over that probably. But either way, you can use this because I still use the information sheet when it was face to face and when it was online. If it's online, you can project it if you have that feature. If not, we emailed it or put it on Show My Homework to parents in advance and said, you can refer to this now or later. And what I used to do on the parent sheets was this. That is actually a hyperlink, so you can click on that. This isn't a download. This will take you to my Canva account and it will take you to a template that you can then make a copy of and edit, because obviously this information sheet will be out of date. So I wanted to create it as not a download. I wanted to make it something that you can edit yourself. So what I would do is just write the title of the parents' evening so we knew which event it was. I would then always put up any important information in terms of exams coming up. So if it was year 11s, 12s, 13s, they might have mock exams. If it's an exam cohort, then they will have final exams. So we'd put the actual specification, papers, dates, and times for them, because that was always a common question we got. When is the next exam? When is the mocks? We used to always be asked what's on the mocks as well. So all of those things that commonly got asked, we put that on the information sheet. And it also then meant that they didn't have to scribble it down. They've got it to take away. They can refer back to it. So that's one thing that I always put on it was key dates, exams, what's coming up. Then I would always do links to what I deem to be useful resources. So for example, we'd give them the link to the AQA website so they could get past papers. We used Caboodle, so there was that. We recommended Cognito and a range of other things for science as well. So we then link useful resources. You can't actually see it because it's just a screenshot, but then the second page of this document, which is available, is where I then list how to revise, because I would have how to revise and what can my student or child do to improve, because I always got those questions as well. What can I do to support my child more at home? So what I would then do is I'd ask them, well, what are you currently doing to revise? We'd check against the list and see, is it something that we recommend? If it is, brilliant, you might want to try this to develop this skill. If not, they should be trying these strategies. What can my child do to improve? Well, depending on what the student is, we had a range of different ideas that might be appropriate for different skill sets, different abilities. We could direct parents to that. So it was a way to basically have an FAQ sheet for the parents' evening, which we can then give to the parents to keep. It cut down the questions. The parents loved it because they could take this away. It addressed their questions in advance. And it then meant the 5-minute time slot we had, we could actually just talk about how is your child doing in lessons and have it a lot more personable and get rid of the admin side. So it prevented these repetitive conversations. A lot of the time, if students didn't have any challenges and they were doing really well, the parents were quite happy with just a 1-minute parents' evening. So, oh, we've said it all, got it all there, done, and we move on. And although that didn't make parents' evening shorter, because it was still 5-minute slots all the way up to the time slot I had, it meant that I had more time in between to rest my voice, have a drink, relax, rather than it being back-to-back 5 minutes. So benefits for the parents for this and benefits for you as a teacher. Number 3 has been a big one for me over the last probably 5 years. In fact, when was COVID? That was 5 years ago. So yeah, definitely the last 5 years, possibly even 6. And this is a shift in mindset as a way to better streamline my work. So the big thing was breaking free from that teacher guilt, which most teachers have, because I think in order to go into teaching, you want students to do well. You're doing it because you love your subject, love working with students, and you want to do everything you can to possibly help them. But what that means then is goodwill is often used and perhaps abused, so that way beyond directed time is used. and you are maybe expected or nudged to do things because it's for the students. We really want to help them. It's going to make such a difference for them. And then you feel guilty if you aren't doing it, or at least that was something I really struggled with. I always felt, oh, if I just did an extra hour, I might be really tired, but that extra hour could make a huge difference to that student. And it was something I've really battled with, and I used to just burn myself out. And this takes me on to something called the teacher martyr, which if you listen to the Teach, Sleep, Repeat podcast, they talk about this concept of the teacher martyr a lot on that podcast, which is an amazing podcast if you've never listened to it. And it's this concept of the teacher who will always say yes to everything, thinks that being a good teacher is the teacher who is there the latest every day. They are there the earliest. You might even boast about, "Oh, I was working last night until 9 p.m." and wear that exhaustion and overworking as a badge of honor. And this was completely me. I was so guilty of this, thinking that if I am doing all the hours, saying yes to everything, then I am doing everything I possibly can to help the students. But the reality was, I wasn't actually, because I was getting so tired, ill all the time. I've got a chronic illness. It did actually make me quite ill, and I ended up having to have quite a bit of time off work because of it, which then didn't help the students. And I wasn't turning up as my best self every day. And it wasn't until, this must have been 2019, when my chronic illness got quite bad for maybe a month. So I did have to take some time off and do like a part-time timetable until I was better. And it was at that point that I realized if I had just acknowledged the signs, I knew I was getting ill, but I didn't want to let down my year 11s, and I didn't want to let down my year 13s. So it was getting close to their exams, and I was really worried. I thought if I push, I'll just make it through to that point and then I'll deal with it. And if I'd actually just taken a couple of days off, or maybe said no to a few extra jobs I took on, or asked for help, I probably would have been fine and then wouldn't have had extra time off. And after I had that realization, and then COVID hit, that is when I realized that this concept of being a teacher martyr isn't helping me, doesn't help the other people in my department, setting that up as what a standard of this is good is. And it's not helping the students either. So I needed to shift away from that mindset and realize that it's actually so much better for me, obviously, as a human, and also for the students, if I do prioritize myself rather than prioritizing saying yes to everything and doing everything I possibly can. Because if you're prioritizing yourself, then you are going to be more physically and mentally fit, so you can turn up as your best version each day and be the best version of you as a teacher. So I started to, from that point, identify my priorities as a teacher. What are my non-negotiables that, first of all, definitely part of my contract that I should be doing. Secondly, that I truly believe are going to benefit the students without impacting my well-being. And a big one that I struggled with was practicing saying no, politely but firmly, because I was never someone that said no. And because I never said no, I was always the people that went to, because I thought, oh, well, Katie always says yes, just go and ask her. So I had to start saying, oh, I'd love to help, but I'm at capacity this week, or I'm at capacity, so I can't, sorry. And just left it there. And I used to feel this guilt of, oh, I have to justify it. I'd have to do this, have to do that. But I realized the first time I was like, oh, I'm really sorry. I'd love to help, but I'm at capacity. I can't. People were like, oh, okay, fine. And off they went. I was like, oh my gosh, I could have been saying this for years. And it was that big change in realizing my well-being is just as important in me being a good teacher, and pushing yourself to the limits isn't actually being a good teacher for yourself or for the students. And it's accepting that. And in doing that, it made me lose that guilt, and I stopped feeling guilty. And then also celebrating any wins, big or small, just so that if you were feeling guilty or like you weren't doing enough, you start to see you are making a big impact, even if you feel like you've taken a big step back. So that's one thing to definitely reflect on today. And I know that most people are probably watching this as a recording, but if that resonated a lot with you, I want you to have a think about this week. What is one boundary you are going to set this week? So that could be, you're going to set the boundary of, I will leave work by a certain time every day. No matter if I finish the job or not, I am not staying beyond a certain point because it's more important that I get home to, I don't know, see family or have dinner, relax, reset, refresh. And whatever I haven't done, then it wasn't possible to do in my directed time plus extra that I've already done. So I'll do it at another point. If it still wasn't possible, then I need to tell my head of department or line manager, I'm afraid I've already done extra hours. It's still not been done. We're going to have to look at the timings of this, I'm afraid. And you're perfectly within your rights to do that. So think about whatever your boundary that you want to implement can be that should help you break free from any guilt and therefore also boost your well-being and help you to streamline your workload. Number 4 then is time-saving templates. You might use a lot of these sorts of things already, you might not, but using templates is such a good way to save time on the repetitive tasks. Whether this is tasks that you have to do at the start of every academic year in September, or whether it's tasks that you're doing repeatedly throughout the year. So some examples that I've got are Excel trackers for grades, which is actually another podcast episode that I have filmed today. And I have a template that I'm giving away for free, linked to that podcast episode. But Excel trackers, do you have a template that you use for all of your classes across the whole subject? Like we had them for biology, we had it for the practical endorsement, we had it for the end of unit tests, where every year you can then just open the template, save a new copy and paste student names from Sims, put in all the data like target grades. You've already got the tests that you're going to do throughout the year based on last year, which you can always edit. And then the formulas are already embedded. So you have your spreadsheets made, ready to implement data. Lesson PowerPoint templates. I don't know if you are in a school where the culture is you do quite a lot of sharing of resources. That was the case for the last school that I was at. And we had a standard format for our PowerPoints and we all used them and shared them. And we wouldn't edit the original, we would edit and save our own version. But for every lesson, we had a pre-made PowerPoint that we had created over the last few years in game time. But if you don't have that, I've actually got this as one that you can then download and edit just to have a consistent format to make it quicker if you are having to make new lessons. So I have the title, the lessons in that subject, learning objectives, then start slide. Anytime that you're going to do some questions as a retrieval check, that's the information slides, any application or thinking task, exam technique, and then there's also a plenary one. So you can download that template for free. Letters to parents as well. I had a bank of every letter that I'd ever sent, which I'm sure people also do. So if it was a school trip, that is saved because the chances are we're going to be doing that school trip next year. If it's letters about homework concerns, if it's letters about interventions or exams coming up, whatever it might be, I always saved it after I'd made it so I could then just edit it. And that one's probably a lot easier now there's ChatGPT, because as I talked about in the previous session, you could, if you've got a previous copy, paste it to ChatGPT, say, here's the new dates, new information, update it. Or if you've not even got one, you could say, here's an example of a letter that someone else has sent home, but I want it to contain this information. Here are the things it has to include. Tell it what tone it should be, and it can come up with a draft for you to check. So I've talked about some of these already as we're going through, but think about for these templates, what are the jobs that you repeatedly do that you could actually have a template for? So could you, as I said, have Excel spreadsheet templates, PowerPoint templates, letters home, even emails, which by the way should be 1L, as I'm sure you're aware, not 2, but emails. You can actually save templates, click it, and then just select the template you want, and it embeds straight away into that email, and you can edit it however you want to. So if it is an email, I don't know if parents and students are allowed to email you, but you could have a standard one that you might reply to them saying, I'll get back to you in X amount of time. Or if it's a student, thank you for your email. Come and talk to me at the end of the lesson. Think about what are the repetitive things that take up your time that you could make a saved version or a template for. So you're not starting from scratch every time to save you time and thinking capacity and brain capacity. So again, if you've downloaded this, that is the hyperlink to click it so that you can download that template. An Excel template is coming in the podcast episode. I think it's in 2 weeks. So basically everything I've said today is an option. There are free templates available. Right, practical strategies for balance then. This isn't one that I put on the original list because it was more just a few extra things to think about. So work-life balance has probably been something that's come up in meetings the entire time I've been teaching. And it's a struggle, finding the balance between the demands of being a teacher and you having a social life, a family life, or just time to yourself. And some of the practical strategies I would say to help with this is number one, prioritize ruthlessly. And this goes hand in hand with that mindset shift and guilt that I was talking about. Have a look. If you are feeling overwhelmed, what on your list doesn't have to be done or doesn't have to be done for quite a long period of time, and then just push it aside, don't do it. And if that means you need to let someone know, then just let them know. So I'm really sorry, but at the moment, I'm at capacity. This isn't a priority, I'm aware, so I'm going to do it at X time. So really be ruthless prioritizing. Then have a think, what tools could you be using to streamline your workload? ChatGPT is absolutely the number one that I'd recommend. And if you weren't at the last session, I've uploaded it onto my YouTube channel, the Miss Estruch Teach and Tell one. So you can look at all of the ideas that we discussed for how you can streamline your workload using ChatGPT. But then we talked about the PowerPoint templates just now, Excel templates as well. Other things then, WCF is whole class feedback. So using whole class feedback, can you do any batch planning or team planning? So if you need to plan a new scheme of work, can you take 3 lessons? Someone else takes 3 and so on and so on. Looking at ways you could maybe automate tasks to save time as well. And that goes with those templates that we were talking about. So in terms of some quick wins to help you get a bit more balance into your life as quickly as possible, these are some things that I'd suggest trialing over the next couple of weeks. So number one, use batch planning for repetitive tasks. So the sorts of things are, if you do have to plan your lessons for the week or do your printing for the week or put in your requisitions for the week if you're a biology teacher or science teacher, I would actually batch all of that. I used to have, last year anyway, period 1 on a Monday free, and that is when I'd batch do as many of those jobs as possible. So I'd look ahead to the following week and see what lessons am I meant to be teaching. I was at the stage though where I didn't need to plan new lessons. So I taught it so many times. I just needed to put in my planner, this, and this, open up the PowerPoint, check and see if I wanted to tweak anything, then look at what I needed to print, then look at what I needed to request for practicals. And I would try and do it all in that one batch session rather than think, oh, I need to plan this lesson. Then later, oh, I need to do this one. Just do it all in one while you're in that mindset and you'll be much quicker. Setting a timer. This goes with the being ruthless and finding a balance. If you are going to say that one of the, what was it that I was saying? I can't think of the word now. One of like the boundaries, that's it. One of the boundaries you're going to put in place is I'm going to go home by a certain time. I'd say set an alarm on your phone 10 minutes before that time and at the time. So you're literally setting the timer to go. Or if you're going to say, if you have a lot of emails, I am only going to spend 20 minutes of my hour PPA going through emails. When I've got to that point, time's up, I need to do something else. So those sorts of things are linking to this prioritizing and being ruthless. And then taking breaks. So making sure that you are actually allowing yourself to have a lunch break. I was very guilty of not having a lunch break. I'd eat while I was working because I used to think, well, I like to go home earlier, so I'm going to work through lunch. But make sure you are giving yourself a break because we all need it to refresh. So in summary, here's the things that I've talked about, all of which, as I said, there are free templates, free downloads for everything that I've gone through today. So we've got the whole class feedback, as well as other things we've talked about for how you can make your marking more manageable. And if there are restrictions because of your school's marking policy, then I do strongly recommend you bring this up as a discussion with your line manager or at a department meeting if they can take it further. The parents' evening information sheet, mindset shift. That one, obviously, it's not a template for, but that's what I'd say. Have some time that you're going to invest in reflecting on some things we've talked about. What boundaries can you put in place and feel confident that it is within your rights to say no to something if it's not in your contract and it's beyond directed time. Time-saving templates, so think about what could you be automating or using a template for. And I've got a range of them here that you can link to, such as the lesson PowerPoint templates. And as I said, the Excel one is coming up in the podcast episode shortly. And then practical strategies for balance, we talked about briefly at the end. So as your quick win, we had quite a few separate quick wins. We talked about trialing out the marking as a whole class, thinking about boundaries you're going to set. But quick win, I'd say download some of these templates and see which you can use if you aren't already. So one other thing just to bring up that could instantly reduce your workload if you have to plan lots of lessons is the fact that I do actually have for the entire A level, and this is only relevant if you're teaching AQA A level biology, but I've got every lesson planned for the entire A level. So again, this is linked, so you can just click it. If you click here as well, you can actually get one lesson for free, so you can see if it does actually suit your teaching style, if you feel like you could get along with it, if it is the level of detail you were looking for. And there's an explanation video just talking you through how I present the lessons and where you can find all the information. But these have been far more popular than I was expecting. I didn't know how it would go down, teachers buying resources, because I know obviously schools have tight budgets, and if you're responsible for buying it, then that's a big expectation that you're spending your own money. But if the school's willing to, if you're willing to, it could be something that really helps with your workload, or if you just want to have a refresh of new ideas, and that's another great thing to try. So have a think about what is one strategy from today or resource or template that you are going to try first. I really hope that for everyone, part of that will include reflecting on your mindset and your boundaries, because at least if you're anything like me, which I kind of assume a lot of people are, if they follow me or come to my sessions, you must resonate with the sorts of things I say and my beliefs in things. So I assume you're probably quite like me in terms of my work ethic, which might then mean you've got the downside of you do suffer from guilt at times and saying yes more than you should. So have a reflect on those concepts. And then the last thing is there is one more of these free CPD sessions to come up in the spring before I then review all the feedback and see how I could tweak them for any future sessions. This one is specific to A-level biology teachers. This session is all about teaching the AQA biology essay, which, as I've got at the bottom, massive disclaimer, this is not accredited or affiliated with AQA. It is just based on my own experiences, the courses I've been on. But I'll be going through in that session how to mark the essay, how to teach it, tips and tricks and things like that. So if you haven't signed up to that one and you're interested, then there's the link in the download as well for that one. Okay, so that takes us to the end of today's session. I did manage to do it a bit quicker than I was expecting, mainly actually because we haven't had the discussions in the chat box, which a lot of the time, last time we had quite a few discussions. So hopefully, I know 2 of you have managed to come live still. Hopefully, being 25 minutes after you're expecting hasn't been too much. And anyone that's watching it now on catch up, it's not going to be the full hour taking up that time. Here's a link to some of the freebies I've talked about and some extras. So there's a GCSE math skills lesson, the A-level carbohydrates lesson, whole class feedback, just as some extras there as well. So I hope you have found it helpful today. And again, a massive apology that it was 45 minutes late. Technical issues with the internet, but thankfully it did start up again. So we did manage to still do it today. still have the recording, and hopefully you have found that helpful. So thank you very much for giving up your time and for joining me. And hopefully I will see you in the next one. I will see if there's any questions. As I said, I think I've got one person still here. So I'm just going to leave this open for any questions. If you don't have any questions, though, feel free to leave now and then I'll know to end the session. But if you do have a question, then I will stay on to answer any questions that you might have. Okay, so no questions live. If you do have any questions, you're welcome to message me. You can see down here my email or Instagram, and I can answer your questions there. But that is it for today. Hopefully you found it helpful, whether you're watching live or as a follow-up, and I will see you at the next one.